She built his empire. He built another family behind her back. For 15 years, Evelyn Romano stood beside the most dangerous man in Chicago, loyal, silent, invisible. She buried 4 pregnancies. She signed every document he placed in front of her. She believed she was building a life. What she was actually building was his alibi, his money-laundering empire, and the cage that would nearly destroy her. The day she finally heard her baby's heartbeat was the same day she watched her husband kiss another woman outside a mansion she never knew existed. This is the story of what happened when Evelyn Romano stopped being a wife and started being a weapon. If this story hits you, drop a like and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this reaches. Now stay with me. Every part of this will matter. The ultrasound photograph was still warm from the printer when Evelyn Romano stepped through the automatic doors of Northwestern Memorial Hospital and into the February cold. She held it with both hands, fingers pressed flat against the edges, like she was afraid the image might dissolve if she gripped it too tight. 8 weeks and 2 days. The technician, a quiet woman named Dana who had seen Evelyn in that same room 4 times before under very different circumstances, had turned the monitor toward her without saying anything extra. There was nothing extra that needed saying. The heartbeat had been there, rapid, steady, a small electrical argument against everything that had come before it. Evelyn had not cried in the room. She'd learned a long time ago not to cry in medical offices, because crying in medical offices led to conversations about stress management and follow-up appointments and the kind of careful, practiced sympathy that made her feel more alone than silence ever did. She'd thanked Dana. She'd folded her coat over her arm. She'd walked out through the corridor with the waxy floors and the smell of antiseptic hand foam, and she'd held herself together until the cold air hit her face. Then she'd stood on the sidewalk and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The city moved around her the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, grinding forward on its own momentum. And for exactly 40 seconds, Evelyn Romano felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could honestly remember. She felt like things were going to be okay. She had planned to call Vincent from the car. She'd imagined the conversation maybe a dozen times in the past hour, testing different versions of the words, trying to find the combination that would make him stop whatever he was doing and actually hear her. They had been through so much loss together, or she had been through it, and he had been present for it in the way that powerful men are present for things they cannot control. Physically, in the room, emotionally, somewhere else entirely, already calculating what came next. But this time was different. This time the heartbeat was there, and she wanted to see his face when she told him. She decided she would go to him directly. Vincent had a standing Tuesday arrangement, always described as a business lunch, always ending by 3, always at the same restaurant on Michigan Avenue, where the maitre d' knew him by name, and the back corner booth was held regardless of whether he called ahead. Evelyn had been to that restaurant with him dozens of times over the years. She knew the booth, knew the lighting, knew the particular way Vincent sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. She flagged a cab rather than calling her driver, some instinct she couldn't name pulling her toward the small anonymity of a stranger's car. She sat in the back with the ultrasound photograph in her lap and watched the city move past the window. The lake was steel gray in the distance, flat and enormous and utterly indifferent. She'd grown up in this city. She'd married into it on a different level entirely, a level where the same streets looked the same, but everything underneath them was different. The cab turned onto Michigan Avenue, and Evelyn leaned forward, already scanning for Vincent's Escalade among the cars ranked along the curb. She saw the vehicle before she saw him. The black Cadillac Escalade, plates she knew, engine running, Dominic behind the wheel the way Dominic always was. A large, careful man who had been driving Vincent for 6 years and who communicated almost exclusively in nods. The car was double parked outside a building Evelyn didn't recognize, a glass and steel structure 2 blocks north of the restaurant. "Here is fine," she told the driver. She paid in cash and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Vincent emerged from the building's lobby at the same moment, and Evelyn's first instinct was pure reflex. She moved toward him, the photograph already half raised in her hand, the words forming at the back of her throat. Then she saw the woman. She was blonde, late 20s, wearing a camel-colored coat that had been cut to accommodate the pronounced curve of her pregnancy. She moved carefully, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other reaching for Vincent as he came through the door. He took her hand without looking down, the way you take someone's hand when you have taken it 1,000 times before and the motion has stopped requiring thought. He said something close to her ear. The woman laughed quietly, tipping her head toward him. Vincent opened the rear door of the Escalade himself. He did it carefully, one hand steadying her elbow, guiding her in with an attention Evelyn recognized from a very specific and very distant period in their marriage. The first 2 years, before the Empire had fully consumed him, when he had still occasionally looked at her like she was the most important thing in the room. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk and did not move. The Escalade pulled into traffic. Evelyn watched it go. She was still holding the ultrasound photograph. She looked down at it once, at the small white curve of the embryo against the black background, the measurement markers the technician had placed along its length. 8 weeks and 2 days. She hailed another cab. She told the driver to follow the black Escalade, and she said it in the flat, controlled voice she had learned from 15 years of being Vincent Romano's wife. A voice that did not explain itself and did not invite questions. The driver followed without comment. They drove north and then northwest, out of the density of the city's core and into a neighborhood that transitioned gradually into something quieter, more private, the lots getting larger and the trees getting older. The Escalade turned through a gate Evelyn almost missed. Wrought iron, set between stone pillars, a camera mounted at the top that swept and steadied as the vehicle passed through. She had the driver stop half a block back. "Wait here," she said. She got out and walked along the tree line, staying off the sidewalk, moving through the brown February grass between the bare oaks. The property was substantial, the kind of land that existed inside the city limits but felt apart from them, screened by mature landscaping and the particular silence of money. Through the trees she could see the house. Stone exterior, wide front steps, the Escalade parked in the circular drive. Vincent was helping the woman up the front steps. At the door, he turned her toward him with both hands on her face, the gesture unmistakable even at this distance, and kissed her. Not a perfunctory kiss. Not the kind of kiss that was really a goodbye or a formality. The kind of kiss that belongs to a specific and serious intimacy. Slow, deliberate, the kind that only exists between two people who are not performing anything for anyone. Evelyn stood among the oak trees in the February cold and watched her husband kiss another woman outside a house she had never known existed. She stood there for a long time. The cold had stopped bothering her. She couldn't feel her fingers around the ultrasound photograph, but she registered this distantly as a fact about her body rather than a sensation. She watched Vincent go inside. She watched the front door close. She watched the security guard at the corner of the property walk his slow circuit, hands in his jacket pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. She turned and walked back to the cab. She said her home address. She looked out the window the entire ride and said nothing else. The house on Astor Street was empty when she arrived, or empty in the way it was always technically empty, meaning the staff was present but invisible, the housekeeper moving somewhere in the upper floors, the kitchen cleaned and reset from breakfast. Evelyn went to the study. She sat in the leather chair behind Vincent's desk, the one she almost never used because it had always felt like his space, even when he wasn't in it. She placed the ultrasound photograph on the desk in front of her. She sat there for 4 hours. Vincent came home at 6:15, which was 20 minutes later than usual, which she noted without particular feeling. She heard him in the foyer, his voice low, talking to someone on his phone, the brief exchange of words with whoever had opened the door. Then his footsteps in the hall, unhurried, the familiar weight and rhythm of them. He came through the study door and stopped when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked at her the way he sometimes did when he was calculating something. Not hostile, not guilty, just assessing. Vincent Romano had survived 43 years and built an empire that would have destroyed a lesser man by learning to read rooms before he walked fully into them. "You're sitting in my chair," he said. "I know," Evelyn said. He came into the room and loosened his tie, a habitual motion. He moved toward the bar cart in the corner. You want a drink? No. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon for himself and didn't push it. He leaned against the bookcase with the glass in his hand and looked at her. The lamp on the desk made the space between them feel smaller than it was. Who is she? Evelyn said. The pause lasted exactly 3 seconds. She counted them. Charlotte, he said. Charlotte Hayes. Your assistant. Yes. How long? He took a drink, set the glass down on the bookcase with a quiet click. 14 months. 14 months. Evelyn had been in 2 failed fertility treatments during those 14 months. She had miscarried in October the 3rd time, the one that had sent her to the hospital for 2 days and had come closest to breaking her in a way the previous 2 had not. Vincent had been there for that. He had sat in the hospital chair next to her bed and held her hand and told her they would try again when she was ready. 14 months. The baby, Evelyn said. He said nothing. Is it yours? She says yes. A pause. I believe her. Evelyn looked at the ultrasound photograph on the desk. She turned it around slowly and pushed it across the surface toward him. He looked at it. She watched him look at it, watched the calculation in his expression slow and then stop, replaced by something that was either genuine or a very good approximation of genuine. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved up to hers. Evelyn, 8 weeks, she said. I found out this morning. I was going to come to the restaurant to tell you. The silence in the room had a texture to it. The bourbon sat untouched on the bookcase. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. Traffic, a distant siren, the low pressure of wind against the windows. I want to fix this, Vincent said. His voice had changed registers, dropped into something quieter, and she recognized that register too. It was the voice he used when he needed something from someone and had decided sincerity was the most efficient tool available. Whatever it takes. Evelyn picked up the ultrasound photograph. She held it for a moment, looking at it, and then she folded it carefully along its original crease and put it in the pocket of her jacket. You built another family, she said, while I was losing hours. It wasn't, don't. She stood. Don't explain it. I don't want the explanation. She was at the door when he said her name again. She stopped but didn't turn around. I love you, he said. That's still true. I know you believe that, she said. She went upstairs. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the bedroom that had been theirs for 12 years and listened to the sound of the house and thought about the shape of the 15 years she had given to this man and this life. The sacrifices had seemed reasonable at the time, each one individually. The career she'd set aside when the business needed her full attention. The friends she'd gradually lost to the specific social gravity of Vincent's world. The trips she hadn't taken, and the opinions she hadn't voiced, and the slow, incremental disappearance of the woman she'd been before Astor Street. Each one had seemed like a reasonable trade for the life they were building together. By 3 in the morning, she understood that she had not been building a life. She had been building his. She was still in bed but not sleeping when the gray winter light began at the window. And when her phone showed 6:47, she sat up and reached for it and found the number she had saved 2 years ago and never used. The number a friend had pressed on her at a dinner party with a meaningful look Evelyn had chosen to ignore at the time. Michael Carter, attorney at law. She called before she could change her mind. The phone rang 4 times and then a man answered, his voice alert despite the hour, carrying the particular quality of someone accustomed to receiving important calls before the city was fully awake. Carter? My name is Evelyn Romano, she said. I need to speak with you about a divorce. The silence on the other end lasted 2 seconds. Can you come in today? Michael Carter said. Yes, she said. Tell me when. She was already moving toward the closet when he gave her the time. She dressed efficiently in the gray morning light, choosing clothes the way she had learned to choose everything in Vincent's world. Deliberately, without hesitation, presenting nothing that could be read as weakness. She did her makeup at the bathroom mirror and looked at the woman in the reflection with something approaching steadiness. She had expected to feel broken. Instead, she felt something colder and more durable than that. She felt clear. The first meeting with Michael Carter lasted 3 hours. He was a compact man in his early 50s, with the kind of face that revealed nothing. It didn't intend to reveal, and he listened to everything she said with a stillness that she recognized as professional rather than emotional. He asked precise questions. He took notes by hand rather than on a screen. When she finished, he set his pen down and looked at her directly. "I want you to understand something before we go any further," he said. "Your husband is not a typical divorce case. The Romano name carries weight in this city at multiple levels, and any attorney who tells you this will be straightforward is either naive or lying to you." "I know what my husband is," Evelyn said. "Do you?" Carter said. Not a challenge, a genuine inquiry. "I know he runs a criminal organization through a network of legitimate businesses," she said. "I know the Romano family is the reason 3 judges in this county recuse themselves from anything with his name on it. I know he has never been indicted because the people who could indict him have historically found it more convenient not to." Carter studied her for a moment. "Then you understand the risk." "I understand it." "And you want to proceed anyway." "I want to proceed," she said, "because I am 8 weeks pregnant with his child, and I watched him kiss his pregnant mistress outside a house he's been keeping for over a year, and I signed whatever documents he put in front of me for 15 years without reading them carefully enough, and I think it's time someone started reading them." The room was quiet for a moment. "All right," Michael Carter said. He picked up his pen. "Let's start at the beginning. She didn't go home that night. She checked into a hotel under her maiden name, Evelyn Walsh, a name she hadn't used in 15 years, and sat in the room and ordered soup she didn't eat and thought about beginnings. The beginning of the marriage. The beginning of the money. The beginning of the slow construction of the empire that had eventually required all of her and given back less and less with each passing year. She thought about Charlotte Hayes. She thought about the camel coat and the careful way Vincent had guided her up the front steps and the house she hadn't known existed. She thought about what 14 months meant in terms of a timeline and found herself reconstructing the past year and a half in a new frame. Every business trip, every late meeting, every night he'd come home distracted and distant, recontextualized now against the knowledge of what he'd actually been doing. And underneath all of it, steady and persistent as a drumbeat, the ultrasound, the heartbeat. 8 weeks and 2 days, a small electrical argument against everything that had come before it. She fell asleep with the lamp on. 3 days later, Michael Carter called her with the first piece of information she hadn't expected. "Your husband has been moving marital assets," he said without preamble. "We're talking millions. The Charlotte Hayes property alone, the estate you located, appears to have been purchased and maintained using funds from at least 2 accounts we can identify as marital property. But that's the surface." "What's underneath it?" she said. Carter paused, and in that pause was the specific quality of a careful man deciding how much to say before he was certain of his facts. "The shell companies," he said. "There are a lot of them. And your name, Evelyn, your signature, appears on documents connected to several of them." The cold that moved through her then was different from the cold she'd felt standing in the oak trees watching Vincent kiss Charlotte Hayes. That cold had been the cold of grief, of recognition, of something loved dying in real time. This cold was something else. This was the cold of understanding that the ground beneath her was not what she had believed it to be. "What kind of documents?" she said. "That," Carter said carefully, "is what we need to find out." She sat in the hotel room with the phone pressed to her ear and the city spread out below the window, 18 floors of empty air between her and the street, and she thought about 15 years of documents placed in front of her and signed without reading them carefully enough. And she thought about what it meant that her name was on those papers. And she thought about the baby that was still, against all odds, still there. 8 weeks and 2 days. She thought about what kind of world she was bringing that child into and what she was willing to do to change it. "Tell me everything," she said. And somewhere across the city, in the house behind the iron gate, a security camera swept its slow arc across a driveway where a black Escalade sat cooling in the dark. And inside the house, Don Vincent Romano sat with a glass of bourbon and a phone pressed to his own ear, talking in a low voice to someone whose number wasn't saved in any device Evelyn had ever been allowed to see. The documents arrived in a manila envelope on a Thursday morning, slid under the hotel room door sometime before 6 a.m., and Evelyn found them when she got up to get water and stepped on the edge of the envelope in the dark. She turned on the lamp. She sat on the edge of the bed in her hotel robe and spread the papers across the comforter and read every page twice before she picked up her phone. Carter answered on the second ring. "Someone delivered documents to my hotel room," she said. "I don't know how they found me here." A pause. "What kind of documents?" "Financial records, shell company registrations, transfer authorizations." She turned a page. "My signature is on 6 of them. I don't remember signing any of them." Another pause, longer. "Don't touch anything else. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He was there in 32. He came in wearing a coat over what looked like yesterday's shirt and read through the papers standing at the foot of the bed without sitting down, without asking permission, moving through each page with the methodical speed of a man who had been reading financial documents for 30 years and could extract the important facts from a page the way other people skimmed headlines. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at her. "These are real," he said. "I know they're real. Your signature on the transfer authorizations, do you have any memory of signing documents that could have been these? Anything Vincent put in front of you, maybe framed as routine paperwork, something for the business?" "He put things in front of me constantly," Evelyn said. "In the first 8 years especially. He said it was about the businesses being in both names, tax purposes, liability structure. I signed what he asked me to sign." She stopped. "I trusted him." Carter set the papers down. He pulled the desk chair around and sat facing her. "Evelyn, what these documents suggest, and I want to be precise here because suggest is the operative word until we verify. What they suggest is that your signature was used to authorize transfers through offshore accounts that were not part of any legitimate business operation you were aware of." "Money laundering," she said. "Potentially, yes. Through accounts in my name. Through accounts where your signature appears as an authorizing party." She stood up. She went to the window and stood with her arms crossed and looked out at the city in the early morning light, the lake flat and pale in the distance, the streets below just beginning to fill. "Who sent these?" "I don't know yet. Someone is feeding me information." She turned around. "Someone wants me to know this." "Or," Carter said carefully, "someone wants you to do something with it." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the steady, unrevealing expression she had come to recognize as his version of honesty. The face he wore when he was telling her something she was not going to want to hear, but needed to hear anyway. "Either way," she said, "I need to know what I signed." Carter nodded slowly. "I'm going to bring in a forensic accountant, someone I trust completely. We're going to trace every company name in these documents, every account number, every transfer authorization. This is going to take time." "How much time?" "Weeks, possibly." "I don't have weeks," Evelyn said. "I'm 8 weeks pregnant, and my husband's legal team is going to start moving the moment he realizes I'm not coming home." Carter was quiet for a moment. "Has he contacted you?" "Twice yesterday. I didn't answer." "He'll escalate." "I know." She looked back at the window. "I know exactly how he escalates." She was right about the timeline. By Friday afternoon, Vincent's attorney, a man named Gerald Foss, who had been the Romano family's primary legal counsel for 11 years and who wore his suits the way fortresses wear their walls, had already filed a motion in family court requesting documentation of Evelyn's current residence and mental state. The language was careful and surgical, concern for the welfare of a spouse undergoing significant emotional distress, reasonable inquiry into stability of living situation given recent erratic behavior. Carter read her the filing over the phone while she sat in a coffee shop 6 blocks from the hotel, a cup of tea going cold in front of her. "Erratic behavior," she repeated. "It's an opening position. They're trying to establish a narrative before the divorce petition is formally filed. Vincent's trying to define me before I can define myself." "Yes." She thought about this. She thought about the 15 years she had spent being defined by her proximity to Vincent Romano, that's Mrs. Romano, the wife, the graceful woman at his side at charity functions, the woman who signed documents and attended dinners, and gradually became a satellite orbiting a planet that had never once considered what the satellite might want from its own trajectory. "What do I do?" she said. "Right now?" "Nothing that gives them anything to work with. Stay at the hotel. Keep your appointments with me. Don't contact Vincent directly." She looked out the coffee shop window at the street. A woman pushed a stroller past on the sidewalk, moving briskly against the cold, her shoulders hunched and her focus forward. "He's going to come looking for me." "Let him look," Carter said. "You're doing nothing wrong by staying at a hotel." She thought about the security cameras at the Romano house on Astor Street, the ones she'd known about and the ones she'd suspected existed that no one had ever confirmed. She thought about how much of her daily life had been observable, logged, filed away in systems she had never had access to. She thought about how long a man like Vincent Romano had been building information on the people around him while those people assumed they were simply living their lives. "Michael," she said, "when you find what you're looking for in those documents, and I think you're going to find something significant, I need to know before Vincent finds out we have it." "I understand." "Because when he finds out," she said, "things are going to move fast." She was more right than she knew. She decided to see Charlotte Hayes on a Tuesday. It wasn't Carter's idea. He would have strongly advised against it, which was exactly why she didn't tell him until afterward. She drove herself. She'd rented a car under her maiden name, paying cash. And she parked on the street outside the Iron Gate and called the main number for the estate that she'd found in the documents Vincent's own assistant had inadvertently copied her on 8 months ago. A forwarding address for a business delivery that had been misrouted. The phone rang 5 times. Then a woman's voice, careful and contained. "Hello?" "Charlotte," Evelyn said. "This is Evelyn Romano. I'm parked outside. I'm alone. I'd like to talk." The silence lasted long enough that Evelyn almost ended the call. Then, "Come to the gate. I'll have it opened." The house was larger inside than it looked from the tree line. Charlotte Hayes met her in the front hallway. Not the foyer, which would have been formal, but the hallway just past it, which was a different kind of choice, more domestic, more deliberate. She was still visibly pregnant, moving with the careful economy of someone whose body had become its own project. She was younger than Evelyn had estimated from a distance, mid to late 20s, clear skin, tired eyes, the kind of beauty that read as effortless even when it clearly wasn't. She did not offer her hand. "You want tea or something?" Charlotte said. "No." "Okay." She turned and walked toward the front sitting room, and Evelyn followed. Charlotte lowered herself onto the sofa with the practiced care of the very pregnant. Evelyn sat across from her in an armchair and put her coat over her lap and waited. Charlotte said, "I know what you're going to ask." "Then you should just answer it," Evelyn said. Charlotte looked at her for a moment. Her expression was not hostile, which Evelyn had expected, or guilty, which she'd half expected. It was something more complicated, a kind of exhausted, clear-eyed frankness, the look of someone who has spent a long time telling themselves a story that has recently stopped being sufficient. "Did I know he was married?" Charlotte said. "Yes." "From the beginning." "From the 2nd month." "And you continued?" "I continued." Charlotte looked at her hands. "I'm not going to tell you I regret it, because that would be a lie, and you don't deserve a lie. I made a decision to protect this baby. Every decision after that came from that." Evelyn studied the woman across from her. The careful posture, the measured speech, the hands folded in her lap with a deliberateness that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation in some form, imagined it enough times that she'd developed responses. "Does Vincent know I'm here?" "No." Charlotte met her eyes. "I didn't call him." "Why not?" A pause. "Because I wanted to see who you were." The room held a quiet that was not exactly comfortable but wasn't hostile either. 2 women in a house that had been built on a lie, sitting with the wreckage of it between them like furniture no one knew how to remove. Outside, the security camera at the corner of the property made its slow sweep. Evelyn thought about the oak trees. She thought about February cold and a photograph in her pocket. Then the front door opened. She heard his voice in the hallway before she heard his footsteps. Low, speaking to someone outside, a few words she couldn't make out. Then the footsteps, unhurried, the familiar weight of them, and Vincent Romano came through the sitting room doorway and stopped. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Charlotte. Something moved across his face that was not quite any single emotion. It was the expression of a man encountering a situation he had specifically designed his life to prevent. "Evelyn?" His voice was level. "I need you to leave." "I'm in the middle of a conversation," she said. "This isn't—" He checked himself, looked at Charlotte. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Charlotte said. She looked at him with something Evelyn couldn't fully read. Not fear, not reassurance, something in between. "Vincent?" Evelyn kept her voice very even. "I'm not leaving until Charlotte and I are finished talking." He crossed the room in 4 steps. He took her arm, not rough, not gentle, the grip of a man removing an obstacle with practiced efficiency, and said quietly near her ear, "You need to walk out of here right now. My people are outside." She pulled her arm back. She had not intended to pull it back the way she did, with the full force of 15 years of compressed resentment behind it, and he hadn't expected that force because he had never had reason to expect it before. Her elbow caught the edge of the low table between the sofa and the chair. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the rug, and there was a half-second where she felt the world tilt. She hit the floor hard on her right side, her shoulder taking most of it, her head snapping back and striking the hardwood just past the edge of the rug. The room was very still. Charlotte made a sound. Not a scream, something sharper than that. Involuntary. Vincent was crouching beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder, his voice saying something she couldn't fully parse because there was a ringing in her right ear and the ceiling was suddenly directly in her field of view. "Evelyn, Evelyn, look at me. Don't." She pushed his hand away. She tried to sit up and the room moved sideways. "Don't touch me. You need a doctor. Get away from me." She got herself upright with her hand on the armchair and stood, though the floor felt uncertain under her. There was a pain in her right side that was sharper than the shoulder impact could explain. She knew what that pain was. She had known pain in that specific location before, 3 times before, and each time it had meant something that she would not let herself think about right now. Not in this room, not in front of these 2 people. She picked up her coat from the floor. She walked out. She was 4 blocks away before she called Carter, and by then the pain had sharpened enough that she pulled the rental car over to the curb and sat with both hands on the steering wheel and focused on breathing the way the hospital counselor had taught her after the 3rd miscarriage. Slowly, deliberately, in and out, creating a rhythm that the rest of her body could organize itself around. "I need you to take me to Northwestern Memorial," she said when Carter answered. A pause. "What happened?" "I'll tell you on the way. Please come now." She was in the hospital for 6 hours. Carter sat in the waiting room for all of them, reading documents on his phone and drinking bad coffee and not calling anyone he didn't need to call. When the doctor, a woman Evelyn had not seen before, came to speak with her, she did so with the specific gentleness that Evelyn recognized immediately. The gentleness that preceded information that could not be made gentle by any delivery. She already knew before the doctor finished the first sentence. She lay in the hospital bed afterward and stared at the ceiling and did not cry. She was very tired of the specific combination of those 2 things, hospital ceilings and the deliberate suppression of tears. But she was also, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the grief and the flat, bright horror of what had happened, conscious of something else. A hardening. A narrowing of purpose. The kind of clarity that comes not from thinking, but from having had the last thing taken away that you were willing to give. Carter came in when the nurse indicated he could. He sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at her, and for once his carefully unrevealing face showed something. Not pity, which she would have found unbearable, but a kind of grim, patient anger on her behalf that she hadn't expected and found she needed. "Tell me," she said, before he could speak. "Vincent's legal team filed while you were in here," he said. 2 hours ago." She looked at him. "Divorce petition, formal, with attached statements." He paused. There's a declaration from Charlotte Hayes claiming you came to the property and became aggressive and verbally abusive. There's a statement from one of the security staff corroborating it. Vincent's attorney is requesting an emergency protective order based on... He stopped. Based on what? Evelyn said. Based on your alleged emotional instability and the potential risk you pose to Charlotte Hayes' unborn child. The ceiling of the room was white acoustic tile with a faint water stain near the light fixture. Evelyn looked at it for a long moment. He filed while I was in the hospital, she said. Yes. He knew I was here. Dominic would have followed you from the estate, Carter said. They'd have known within minutes of you leaving. She turned her head and looked at him. He let me fall, she said, and then he called his lawyer from the parking lot while I drove myself to the hospital. Carter said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. She closed her eyes. She thought about 15 years, she thought about 4 pregnancies and 4 losses, and the specific texture of each one. The way grief accumulates not in sudden catastrophes, but in slow, incremental deposits. The way a riverbed fills with silt until the river itself changes course. She thought about the documents with her signature on them, pages she hadn't read carefully enough, and she thought about what her name on those pages meant in terms of what was coming. She thought about the anonymous envelope slid under her hotel room door. She thought about Carter's word. Someone wants you to do something with it. She opened her eyes. Michael, she said. The forensic accountant. How quickly can she move? He looked at her steadily. Faster, if I tell her it's urgent. Tell her it's urgent. She pushed herself upright against the pillow, ignoring the ache in her shoulder. And I need you to find out who sent those documents, because whoever it is, they have more, and I think they've been waiting for me to be ready to use it. Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, a decisive motion. There's one more thing, he said. She waited. The shell companies in those documents, we've been cross-referencing the registration data. 3 of the names appear in federal financial intelligence databases. He paused. The Romano family has been on a low-level federal watch list for 6 years. These accounts, the ones with your signature, they're not just divorce leverage, Evelyn. If what we think we're looking at is accurate, we're talking about documented participation in a money laundering network that moved in excess of $200 million over the past decade. The room was very quiet. My participation, she said. Your name, he said, which is not the same thing, but in terms of federal exposure, they could come after me. Before they come after Vincent, yes, spouses are useful pressure points. He held her gaze. I think someone already knows this, and I think whoever sent you those documents either wants to protect you from that outcome or wants to control which direction you run when it happens. Evelyn sat with this for a long moment. Outside the room, the hospital moved in its ordinary rhythms. Footsteps in the corridor, a cart wheeled past, someone's voice asking a question in a normal, everyday tone. The ordinary machinery of a world that did not know or care what was happening inside this particular room. She thought about the iron gate, the security camera, the oak trees in February. She thought about a man who had looked her in the eye and said, I love you, while his other family waited 14 months in a house she hadn't known existed. She thought about $200 million and her signature on the authorizing documents. Get me the name of the best federal criminal defense attorney in this city, she said. Not someone connected to Vincent. Someone who has gone against the Romano family before and is still standing. Carter reached into his coat and produced a business card, which he set on the tray table beside her bed. She picked it up. Rachel Morgan, it read. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney, Northern District of Illinois. Federal Criminal Defense. She looked up at him. You already knew, she said. I suspected, he said. About 2 days after you first called me. And you waited. I waited until you were ready, he said. Evelyn Romano held the business card between her fingers and looked at the name on it and thought about what it meant to call this number. What doors it would open, what doors it would permanently close. What version of the next year of her life began the moment she made this call versus every other version that didn't. She thought about the baby she had lost tonight. She thought about the document with her name on it, authorizing a transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands in the amount of $47 million, a document she had absolutely no memory of signing and which bore her signature as clearly as anything she had ever put her name to in her life. She thought about Charlotte Hayes sitting across from her in that sitting room with her tired eyes and her hands folded in her lap, saying, "I wanted to see who you were." She thought about who she was. She picked up her phone. Rachel Morgan's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Walker Drive that had no Romano family connections, no affiliated tenants, and a security desk that required photo ID before the elevator would accept a floor number above 12. Evelyn had noticed all three of these things when Carter brought her there 4 days after she left the hospital, and she had understood them as deliberate choices. The architecture of a woman who had spent years working inside federal prosecution and had learned exactly what it meant to be careful. Morgan herself was 51, lean in the way that suggested discipline rather than deprivation, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of eyes that processed information the way a camera processes light, continuously, automatically, without apparent effort. She had prosecuted organized crime for 14 years before leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office. She had put 11 men connected to Chicago's criminal infrastructure behind bars. She had never lost a federal case where she was the lead attorney. She had also, Carter had told Evelyn in the car on the way over, once been approached by Vincent Romano's people with an offer that would have paid for her children's educations twice over, and had responded by reporting the approach to her supervisor and documenting every detail in writing before the meeting was even over. She was the right person. Morgan read through the documents, the originals from the envelope, plus Carter's forensic accountant's preliminary findings, without speaking for 22 minutes. Evelyn counted. She had nothing else to do with her hands except count. When Morgan set the papers down, she looked at Evelyn directly and said, "Tell me about the documents you signed. Not what they were for, what you remember about signing them, the physical circumstances, where you were, how they were presented to you, whether anyone else was in the room." So Evelyn told her. She told her about the early years, the routine signings at the kitchen table before Vincent left for meetings. She told her about the business reorganization in year 4, when Vincent had restructured the Romano Holdings umbrella and her signature had appeared on what he described as standard liability documents. She told her about the accountant, a man named Stresser, who had been Vincent's financial manager for years, and who had sometimes been present when documents were signed, sometimes not. She told her about the occasions when Vincent had been traveling and had documents couriered to her with a tab marking the signature line and a brief note saying routine, nothing urgent. Morgan listened to all of it without interrupting. When Evelyn finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The transfers to the offshore accounts," Morgan said, "the ones where your signature appears as authorizing party. There are 11 of them over a 7-year period. Were you ever present for any wire transfers, any meetings about offshore account activity?" "No." "Did Vincent ever discuss offshore holdings with you?" "He mentioned international investments occasionally. Nothing specific." "Did you know a man named Reyes, Frank Reyes, also known as Francisco Reyes, financial intermediary with connections to a shell company called Meridian Pacific Holdings?" Evelyn looked at her. "No." Morgan picked up a page from the stack and laid it in front of Evelyn. "This is a notarized affidavit establishing you as a co-signatory on the Meridian Pacific account. It's dated 4 years ago. The notarization is from a public notary in Cook County." She paused. "The notary is real. Her seal is authentic. The date is authentic. But according to her records, which we have already subpoenaed, she notarized 47 documents on that particular day and has no specific memory of you." Evelyn looked at the affidavit, at the signature, at the careful, familiar loops of her own name written in ink that was not her ink and formed by a hand that was not her hand. "That's not my signature," she said. "No," Morgan said, "it isn't. Which means someone with access to samples of your genuine signature and the resources to replicate it accurately enough to pass professional notarization, forged it." She paused, and then continued forging it across 11 separate transactions over 7 years. Evelyn sat with this. "Vincent," she said. "Or someone working for Vincent," Morgan said. "Yes, but here is the problem, and I need you to understand this very clearly." She leaned forward slightly. "Right now, those signatures look real. The forensic document analysis I've commissioned will take 6 to 8 weeks to establish forgery with the degree of certainty we need for federal proceedings. Until then, from a federal investigator's perspective, your name is on documents authorizing money movement through a criminal network. You are a potential co-conspirator. The words sat in the room between them. They could charge me, Evelyn said. They could charge you before they charge Vincent, Morgan said. That is the standard playbook. You pressure the spouse, offer a reduced exposure in exchange for cooperation, and use whatever the spouse provides to build the primary case. The difference in your situation is that whoever sent you these documents did so specifically to get ahead of that process. She looked at Evelyn steadily. Someone is trying to help you, or use you, possibly both simultaneously. Carter, who had been quiet in the corner chair throughout all of this, said, "We still don't know who sent the envelope." "No," Morgan said. She turned to him. "But I have a theory." She stood and went to the window. The city below was gray and moving, February extending itself with characteristic stubbornness. "Has Evelyn been approached by anyone connected to the Blackwell Syndicate?" The name dropped into the room like something heavy. Carter went still in his chair. Evelyn said, "Who?" Morgan turned from the window. "The Blackwell Syndicate, a rival organization operating primarily on the north side and in the collar counties. They've been the Romano family's primary competitor for territory and legitimate business fronts for the better part of a decade." She paused. "They have been very quietly, very methodically building a federal case against Vincent Romano for approximately 3 years. Not by cooperating with authorities, by feeding information to authorities anonymously, while simultaneously positioning their own organization to absorb Romano holdings once the federal investigation collapses the family structure." Evelyn looked at her. "You're saying someone from this rival organization sent me those documents. I'm saying it's possible. I'm also saying that if true, they did not send them out of concern for your welfare." Morgan came back to the desk and sat. "Victoria Blackwell runs the organization. She inherited it from her father 6 years ago, and she is, by every credible account, significantly more dangerous than the man she succeeded, because she is also significantly more intelligent and has no romantic attachment to violence for its own sake. She uses information the way other people use weapons, and she has been building toward a moment when the Romano family collapses under federal weight and she can position the Blackwell Syndicate to fill the vacuum." "And I am—" Evelyn stopped. "You are the accelerant," Morgan said. "If she sent you those documents, she sent them because you, cooperating with federal investigators, can collapse Vincent's operation in months rather than years. You would do in one cooperation agreement what she has spent 3 years building toward." Morgan looked at her with the particular directness of someone who respects the person they're speaking to enough to not soften what needs to be said. "You would be doing the right thing for the wrong person's reasons." Evelyn sat in the chair in Rachel Morgan's 14th floor office and felt the architecture of the situation fully for the first time. Not just the betrayal of her marriage, not just the legal exposure, but the full-dimensional reality of it, that she was not simply a woman wronged by a faithless husband. She was a piece on a board that multiple powerful people had been moving without her knowledge for years. Vincent had used her, and now someone else was trying to use her in the opposite direction. "What do I do?" she said. "You cooperate with federal investigators," Morgan said, "but you do it on your terms, with full legal representation, with the forgery evidence in hand the moment it's ready, and with a cooperation agreement that provides you complete immunity before you give them a single document." She paused. "And we find out who Victoria Blackwell is before she decides you've served your purpose." 3 days later, the anonymous contact reached out directly. It came as a message through the hotel's front desk, a handwritten note requesting a meeting at a specific address, a law office in River North that Evelyn didn't recognize, at 2 p.m. the following afternoon. The note said, "You have questions I can answer. Come alone or don't come." It was signed with initials only, JB. She showed Carter. Carter showed Morgan. Morgan ran the initials and the address and came back to Evelyn 40 minutes later with an expression that was as close to surprise as Evelyn had seen on her face. "Julian Blackwell," Morgan said. "Victoria's younger brother. He left the organization 4 years ago, or claims to have. He has no criminal record. He runs a private investment firm, genuine legitimate operations as far as we can determine. She paused. He also attended Northwestern, graduated same year as you. Evelyn stared at her. I don't know him. He may know you, Morgan said, or know of you. People in that world track connections. A pause. I think you should go. You said come alone. Go with a wire, Morgan said. I'll be 2 blocks away. She went alone. She wore the wire under her blouse, a small flat device that Carter had sourced through a contact he declined to name. She took the rental car and parked in the attached garage, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and found the suite number from the note and knocked twice. Julian Blackwell opened the door himself. He was 40, or close to it, with the kind of face that had once been conventionally handsome and had been improved by whatever had worn at it. Something in the jaw, the set of his eyes, the way he held himself with a stillness that didn't read as calm so much as controlled. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, and he looked at her the way Morgan had looked at her the first time, assessing, but without the clinical detachment. There was something else in his expression that she couldn't immediately name. Mrs. Romano, he said. Ms. Walsh, she said. Something shifted in his face. He stepped back and let her in. The office was small and spare. A desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking a courtyard. No artwork, no plants, nothing that suggested permanence. A meeting space, not a working space. He sat across from her and did not offer anything, so no tea, no pleasantries, no performative courtesy. She noted this as a form of respect. He had decided she didn't need to be managed. You sent me the documents, she said. Yes. Why? He looked at his hands for a moment. Because my sister has been building toward your destruction for 2 years, he said. Not because of anything you did. Because you are married to Vincent Romano and you are the cleanest point of legal exposure he has, and Victoria has been feeding that exposure to federal investigators while simultaneously keeping documents that would have cleared you locked in a private server to which only she has access. Evelyn looked at him. What documents? A sworn deposition from Frank Reyes, Julian said, taken 18 months ago. In it, Reyes confirms that he was paid, by Vincent through a third party, to forge your signature on the Meridian Pacific authorization documents and 5 others. He identifies the forger. He names the notary who was bribed to process the documents without requiring your presence. Julian looked at her steadily. My sister has had this deposition for 18 months. She withheld it. Because the moment that deposition surfaces, you are no longer a pressure point. You are a victim. And a victim cooperating with federal authorities is a much less useful instrument than a suspect. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed through the courtyard below, its engine sound rising and fading. She was going to let me be charged, Evelyn said. She was going to let you be threatened with charges, Julian said. The distinction matters to her. She would have produced the deposition at the moment it gave her maximum leverage, not to save you, but to demonstrate to federal investigators that she was a cooperative source worth protecting. Evelyn absorbed this. The wire was warm against her skin. She thought about Morgan 2 blocks away, listening. She thought about what this information did to the shape of everything she'd understood for the past 2 weeks. Why are you telling me this? She said. She's your sister. Julian was quiet for a moment. His hands rested flat on his knees, and he looked at them the way a man looks at something he has decided to acknowledge. Because I left the organization for a reason, he said, and watching Victoria turn you into a variable in her calculation is the same reason, wearing different clothes. He looked up. I have a copy of the Reyes deposition. I'm giving it to you, not to her, not to the federal investigators, not to anyone Vincent has ever paid. You decide what you do with it. He set a flash drive on the desk between them. Evelyn looked at it. She thought about the envelope under her hotel room door. She thought about Morgan's word, accelerant. She thought about Victoria Blackwell spending 3 years building toward a moment and withholding the one document that could have prevented 18 months of Evelyn's exposure and vulnerability and the specific grinding terror of seeing her own name on criminal authorization documents she had never signed. She picked up the flash drive. I want to know something, she said. Julian waited. Your sister has been feeding information to federal investigators for 3 years. She's positioned herself to absorb Romano Holdings when Vincent goes down. She paused. What does she get if I cooperate and the whole Romano network collapses on the timeline she's built toward? Julian's expression was careful. The North Side territory. The legitimate business fronts, restaurants, logistics, real estate. The contracts Vincent holds through shell companies that would revert to open market. He paused. She becomes the dominant organized crime figure in Chicago. Not the second most powerful, the first. And what does she get, Evelyn said, if I don't cooperate? More time, more exposure risk. The federal investigation continues at its current pace, which means another 2 or 3 years before Vincent faces charges, during which time something could go wrong, evidence could be suppressed, witnesses could stop cooperating. He paused. She needs you. The deposition she's been sitting on, that was her insurance. She was going to produce it at the right moment to make you trust her enough to move when she needed you to move. Evelyn stood. She put the flash drive in her coat pocket. Does she know you're here? She said. Not yet, Julian said. She will. Evelyn looked at him. That's going to cause you problems. Yes, he said simply. She held his gaze for a moment. This man who had walked away from his own family's criminal organization and was now destroying his sister's 3-year strategy out of something that looked, from where Evelyn stood, like conscience. She wasn't sure she trusted it entirely. She wasn't sure she needed to. Thank you, she said. She left. She called Morgan before she reached the elevator, and by the time she got to the rental car, Morgan had already identified a federal contact she trusted. Not the investigator currently running the low-level Romano watch, but a supervisory agent 1 level above, a woman named Harker who had jurisdiction and who Morgan had worked with during her time as a prosecutor. We go to Harker, Morgan said in Evelyn's ear. Today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. Because the moment Victoria Blackwell finds out Julian gave you that deposition, she's going to move her own timeline, and we do not want to be standing in the path of that. I know, Evelyn said. She sat in the parking garage with the engine running and the flash drive in her coat pocket and thought about the shape of the next 24 hours. Morgan? Yes. The immunity agreement. I want it airtight. Complete immunity for every transaction my name appears on, every account, every authorization. I want it in writing with Harker's signature before I hand over a single document. That's exactly what we're going to get, Morgan said. And I want it on record that the cooperation is voluntary, proactive, and originates with me, not with Victoria Blackwell, and not with pressure from the investigation. Yes. Because I am not, Evelyn said, and her voice was steady, steadier than she had heard it in weeks, steadier perhaps than she had heard it in years. Going to be anyone's instrument? Not Vincent's, not Victoria Blackwell's, not the federal government's unless they meet my terms. She paused. I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do, but I'm going to do it in a way that leaves me standing afterward. She pulled out of the parking garage and into the gray afternoon traffic of River North, the city moving around her the way it always did. Indifferent, enormous, completely unaware of the decision that had just been made inside a parking structure on a Tuesday in February. Morgan said, I'll have Harker's contact on the phone in 30 minutes. Good, Evelyn said. She drove. She thought about 15 years and 4 losses and a signature that was not her signature on documents that had been designed from the beginning to make her the most convenient available sacrifice if everything went wrong. She thought about Victoria Blackwell and her 3-year strategy and the deposition she had locked away for 18 months while Evelyn's life was being dismantled piece by piece. She thought about Julian Blackwell setting a flash drive on a desk and saying, you decide what you do with it. She thought about what it meant to decide. The traffic light ahead turned red and she stopped and waited, both hands on the wheel, the engine idling, the flash drive a small hard weight in her pocket, and she understood with a clarity that had no sentiment in it whatsoever that the woman who had walked into Northwestern Memorial Hospital 8 weeks ago, clutching an ultrasound photograph, was gone, and that whoever was sitting in this rental car at this red light was someone different, someone who had been built from the wreckage of that woman by the specific pressures of the past several weeks, and who was now, for the first time in 15 years, operating entirely on her own terms. The light turned green. She drove toward Rachel Morgan's office with everything she needed to bring down the Romano family, the Blackwell Syndicate's 3-year strategy, and every person who had ever decided that Evelyn Romano was a variable rather than a person, and the federal immunity agreement she was going to extract before she handed over a single word of it was going to be the last document she ever signed without reading every line. The meeting with Supervisory Agent Dana Harker took place in a conference room on the 7th floor of a federal building on Dearborn Street. On a Thursday afternoon when the February cold had finally cracked and the air outside smelled for the first time like something other than winter. Harker was 53, broad-shouldered, with the particular posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where posture communicated authority before a single word was spoken. She had read everything Morgan sent over in advance: the forensic accountant's preliminary findings, the shell company documentation, the flash drive contents which Morgan had printed and organized into a 67-page packet that sat in front of Harker on the conference table in a manila folder with a red stripe across the cover. She had read it all, and she had come to this meeting without a team, which Morgan had told Evelyn was a deliberate choice, a signal that Harker was treating this as an intelligence meeting rather than an enforcement meeting, at least for now. Evelyn sat across the table from her with Morgan on her left and Carter on her right, and felt the specific quality of the room's silence, the kind of silence that exists just before something irreversible begins. Harker looked at her. "You understand what cooperation with this office means in practical terms?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "Walk me through it anyway. I want to know you understand it." Morgan started to speak, and Harker held up one hand without looking away from Evelyn. "From her." Evelyn held Harker's gaze. "It means I provide all documentary evidence I currently possess relating to the Romano family's financial operations. It means I provide testimony in any subsequent federal proceedings. It means I submit to recorded debriefings with your investigators as requested, within parameters established in the cooperation agreement. It means I do not discuss the nature or existence of my cooperation with anyone outside this room and my legal representatives without prior authorization." She paused. "And it means that in exchange, I receive complete immunity from prosecution for any transaction my name appears on in connection with Romano family operations, with the immunity language broad enough to cover any charge that could conceivably be derived from my signature appearing on those documents." Harker looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Morgan. "She's clear." "She's been clear from the beginning," Morgan said. Harker opened the folder. She turned 3 pages without reading them. She had already read them, and turned the folder around to face Evelyn. "The Reyes deposition your source provided." She tapped it. "This is the linchpin. If Reyes recants or becomes unavailable, the forgery argument weakens considerably. What's your confidence in his current willingness to testify?" "Julian Blackwell's confidence," Morgan said. "Not ours directly. But Blackwell indicated Reyes is in a position where cooperation with federal authorities is significantly more attractive than the alternative." "Meaning Vincent found out Reyes gave the deposition." "That's our assessment." Harker closed the folder. "I'm going to be direct with you, Ms. Walsh." The use of her maiden name was a small thing, but Evelyn registered it as intentional. The Romano family investigation has been running at low intensity for 6 years because the evidentiary picture has been consistently incomplete. Witnesses recant, documents surface, and then become inadmissible. We have had 2 previous cooperation agreements with Romano-adjacent figures that collapsed before we could indict. She looked at Evelyn steadily. "What you are bringing to this table is the first internally generated documentary evidence we have had that connects Vincent Romano directly to the offshore laundering network. But it is only useful if you are willing to testify, not just provide documents, testify." "I understand," Evelyn said. "In open court." "I understand what testify means." Harker looked at her for a moment longer. Then she picked up a pen. "Get me the immunity language by end of business tomorrow," she said to Morgan. "We'll have it reviewed and countersigned by Monday. Formal debriefings begin Tuesday." She stood. Evelyn stood. They shook hands across the conference table, and Harker's grip was firm and entirely without warmth, which Evelyn respected more than warmth would have earned. In the elevator going down, Carter let out a breath that he had apparently been holding for some portion of the last hour. Morgan said nothing. Evelyn watched the floor numbers decrease and thought about Tuesday, about sitting in a federal debriefing room, about the shape of what came next. The immunity agreement was signed on Monday at 11 a.m. On Tuesday morning, Evelyn walked into the federal building on Dearborn carrying a leather portfolio containing 15 years of business correspondence, financial records she had reconstructed from her own copies of documents Vincent had given her access to as his administrative partner, and a USB drive containing the digital records that Carter's forensic accountant had recovered from cloud backup accounts Evelyn had maintained in her own name without fully understanding their significance. She sat in the debriefing room, gray walls, fluorescent light, a table with a recording device in the center, and she began to talk. She talked for 4 days, not continuously. There were breaks, there were nights in the hotel, there were calls with Morgan reviewing the next day's material. But she talked with the sustained, detailed completeness of a woman who had spent 15 years paying attention to everything while being treated as if she were paying attention to nothing. She remembered dates. She remembered names. She remembered the particular afternoon in year 7 when Vincent had asked her to sign a set of corporate restructuring documents at the kitchen table and had stood behind her while she signed them, which she had found unusual at the time and had filed away in the part of her mind that noticed things without yet knowing what to do with them. Investigator Loomis, who led the debriefings, was a methodical man who asked the same question from 3 different angles before moving to the next one. By the second day, Evelyn had understood his rhythm and had stopped finding it frustrating. By the 3rd day, she was answering the 3rd version of each question before he asked it. On the 4th day, Loomis set down his pen in the middle of a session and looked at her across the table and said, "Miss Walsh, in 22 years of this work, I have debriefed a significant number of cooperation witnesses. You are the most prepared individual I have sat across from in at least a decade." "I was married to Vincent Romano for 15 years, she said. "I paid attention." On the 5th day, the first capo flipped. Morgan called her at 7 in the morning with the news. Marco DeLucci, Vincent's 3rd-ranking lieutenant and the man who had overseen the Romano family's restaurant and logistics fronts for 9 years, had walked into a federal public defender's office the previous afternoon and requested a cooperation agreement. His attorney, not the public defender, a private attorney he'd retained within hours, had contacted Harker's office by 9 p.m. "He's scared," Morgan said. "The indictment is coming and he knows it, and he wants to be on the right side of it before Vincent's people understand what's happening." "Does Vincent know about DeLucci?" Evelyn asked. "Not yet, but he will within days. When he does—" Morgan paused. "This is going to move fast, Evelyn. The indictment, the arrests. You need to be somewhere Vincent can't reach you." She had already thought about this. She had been thinking about it since Tuesday. "I need to do something first," she said. Morgan was quiet for a moment. "What?" "I need to talk to Charlotte Hayes." The silence that followed was the specific silence of an attorney contemplating a client's decision and deciding whether to argue against it. "Why?" Morgan said finally. "Because Charlotte's false statement is still in the court record," Evelyn said. "The one supporting Vincent's version of what happened at the estate. And when the indictment comes, Charlotte is going to be questioned. And if she's still committed to protecting Vincent at that point, she becomes a federal problem of her own," Morgan said. "She has a newborn daughter," Evelyn said. "I don't want her to become a federal problem. I want her to understand what's coming before it gets here." Another pause. "I can't stop you," Morgan said. "No," Evelyn said. Charlotte opened the estate gate herself this time, which meant she had been watching the camera feed and had made the decision before Evelyn's car reached the intercom. The security guard at the corner of the property was absent. The house felt quieter than Evelyn remembered. Charlotte met her at the front door holding an infant, a girl, small and dark-haired, wrapped in something pale yellow. Charlotte herself looked different. The careful composure of their first meeting was still there, but it was sitting over something rawer now, like paint over a crack. She stepped back and let Evelyn in without speaking. They sat in the same room as before, the sitting room with the low table and the rug where Evelyn had fallen. but the furniture had been rearranged slightly. The armchair moved, the sofa angled differently, as if Charlotte had needed to alter the geometry of the space after what had happened in it. The baby slept in her arms with the boneless completeness of the very new. Evelyn looked at her. "What's her name?" "Lily," Charlotte said. Her voice was quiet. "She's beautiful," Evelyn said. She meant it. Charlotte looked down at the baby for a moment. "Why are you here?" "Because Vincent is going to be indicted," Evelyn said. "Within weeks, possibly sooner, federal charges. Multiple counts. The people around him are already beginning to cooperate with investigators." She paused. "The statement you gave supporting his account of what happened here, the one that said I was aggressive and unstable, that statement is in a court record. When federal investigators start pulling everything connected to Vincent, they will pull that too. And the surveillance footage from this property from that day, which I believe exists, and which I believe shows something different from what your statement describes." Charlotte was very still. "I'm not here to threaten you," Evelyn said. "I'm here because you told me something the first time I came here. You said every decision you made was to protect your baby." She looked at Lily. "That's still true. And the best thing you can do to protect her right now is to correct your statement before federal investigators make it a problem you can't correct." Charlotte looked at her for a long time. The baby made a small sound and shifted slightly, and Charlotte adjusted her hold without looking away from Evelyn. "Did you arrange this?" she said. "The investigation? Did you go to the federal—" "Yes," Evelyn said. Something moved across Charlotte's face. Evelyn watched it and couldn't fully name it. It was not quite anger, not quite grief, something in the compressed space between them. "He told me you wouldn't," Charlotte said quietly. "He said you were too afraid of what it would do to you, that your name was on too many documents." She paused. "He said you'd take the settlement and disappear." "He was wrong about what I was afraid of," Evelyn said. Charlotte looked at her daughter. The room was very quiet. Outside, February was doing its final work on the city, the cold thinning at the edges, the light lasting a few minutes longer each evening. "What do I need to do?" Charlotte said. "Call an attorney today. Not Vincent's attorney, your own. Tell them you want to submit a corrected statement regarding the incident at this property. Tell them you want to do it voluntarily today, before any federal contact." Charlotte nodded slowly. Her jaw was tight. "And Lily?" "Lily is not involved in any of this," Evelyn said. "She never will be, not from my end." Charlotte looked up at her then, directly, fully, the composed surface entirely gone. And what was underneath was not the calculated pragmatism of the woman who had said every decision I made was to protect this baby, but something more foundational than that, something more frightened and more honest. "He made me believe I had to choose between protecting her and being a decent person," she said. "He made that feel like the only choice available." Evelyn held her gaze. "It wasn't," she said. She left Charlotte Hayes holding her daughter in the sitting room and drove away from the estate for what she understood was the last time. 48 hours later, the indictment dropped. She heard it from Morgan at 6:47 in the morning. Her phone buzzing on the nightstand, Morgan's name on the screen, and before she fully answered, she could hear in the first half-second of Morgan's breath that it was real, it was happening. The thing she had set in motion was no longer abstract. "It's filed," Morgan said. 17 counts. Racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, organized crime statute violations. Harker's office coordinated with the U.S. attorney. They're executing the arrest warrant this morning." Evelyn sat up in bed. The hotel room was dark except for the edge of light at the curtain. DeLucci's cooperation agreement was formalized yesterday evening. 2 other capos have signaled through their attorneys. The structure is collapsing faster than anyone projected. A pause. Charlotte Hayes submitted a corrected statement yesterday afternoon. Her attorney called Harker's office and made it proactive and voluntary. It's been accepted into the record. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. "There's something else," Morgan said. She opened them. Victoria Blackwell's office contacted the U.S. attorney this morning. Her attorney is requesting a meeting. She wants a cooperation agreement of her own. Morgan's voice was measured, but underneath it was something that, in another person, might have been satisfaction. The Reyes deposition becoming part of the federal record, the one Julian gave you, the one she'd been sitting on for 18 months. That deposition is now documented evidence that she withheld material information from an ongoing federal investigation. She's facing obstruction exposure. She played too long, Evelyn said. She waited for the perfect moment, and you moved before she expected you to. Evelyn stood. She went to the window and moved the curtain aside and looked out at the city in the early morning. The lake visible in the distance, dark and flat. The streets below already beginning to fill with the ordinary machinery of a morning that did not know or care that the Romano family was ending. "Where is Vincent?" she said. "FBI picked him up at 6 a.m. at the Astor Street house." A pause. "He went quietly." She thought about that. Vincent Romano, Don of the Romano family, the man who had ruled the underworld and legitimate Chicago simultaneously for 15 years, walking out of the house on Astor Street with federal agents on a February morning while the city moved around him exactly the way it always had. Indifferent, enormous, completely uninterested in the scale of any individual's fall. She thought about the bourbon on the bookcase. She thought about his voice saying, "I love you," in the dark of the study. She thought about 14 months and 4 losses and an ultrasound photograph folded along its original crease. She thought about Lily. "Morgan," she said, "the divorce settlement proceedings. When do those begin?" "The divorce is now a federal asset question as much as a marital one," Morgan said. "The legitimate Romano holdings, the businesses Evelyn Walsh Romano built with her own labor and intelligence over 15 years, those are going to be the subject of extensive negotiation. Parker's office understands our position. I want the record clear," Evelyn said. "The cooperation was mine. The decision was mine. The immunity is mine. When this goes to settlement, I want Vincent's attorneys to understand that every legitimate asset I helped build over 15 years is going to be evaluated with that fact front and center." "It will be," Morgan said. She let the curtain fall back. The room was gray and quiet and very still. She could feel her own heartbeat, not fast, not panicked, just present, just steady, doing its ordinary work. Then her phone showed a second call incoming. Unknown number. She looked at it for a moment. She told Morgan she'd call her back and answered. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voice she recognized from one meeting in a sparse office in River North. "They arrested her this morning," Julian Blackwell said. "Victoria. Her attorney is cooperating. Everything she built, the 3-year strategy, the positioning, it's gone. She's going to spend the next 6 months trying not to be indicted herself." A pause. "I wanted you to know." "I know," Evelyn said. "Morgan called?" "Right." Another pause. He sounded tired, and something underneath the tiredness that she recognized because she had felt its cousin in herself. The specific exhaustion of a person who has done a costly thing that needed doing and is now standing on the other side of it without yet knowing what the other side looks like. "I'm sorry about how all of this happened," he said. "What she put you through, what he put you through." "You don't have to apologize for either of them," she said. "No," he said, "but I'm going to anyway." She looked out toward the curtain. Behind it, the city. Behind the city, the lake. "Julian," she said, "the investment firm you run, the legitimate operations." "Yes." "How long have you been running it?" A pause. 4 years since I left." "Is it profitable?" "It is." She thought about what Morgan had said. You would be doing the right thing for the wrong person's reasons. She thought about what Julian had said. You decide what you do with it. She thought about what she was going to do next, and the shape of it was beginning to form in the gray morning light of the hotel room in a way that felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely her own. "I'm going to need something to do," she said, "on the other side of all of this. When you have time, I'd like to talk about what that might look like." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. "Yes," Julian Blackwell said. "I'd like that." She ended the call. She set the phone on the nightstand. She went to the bathroom and turned on the shower and stood under the water with her eyes closed and let it run hot until the room was full of steam and the cold of the morning was entirely gone from her skin. Outside, across the city, in a federal processing facility on the west side, Don Vincent Romano was being fingerprinted by an agent who had never heard his name before last week and who would not remember it clearly a year from now. Because that was how it worked with men who had built themselves into myths. The myth turned out to be the only thing that had been real. And without it, they became ordinary, just another man in a gray room under fluorescent light, waiting to learn what came next. In the Romano family's network, phones were already going dark. Attorneys were already calling other attorneys. The structure that had taken 30 years to build was folding in real time, each cooperation agreement pulling another thread, each pulled thread loosening the one beside it, the whole architecture coming down with the particular speed of things that had been held up for a long time by the single load-bearing fact of one man's unchallenged authority. And in a hotel room on the north side of Chicago, Evelyn Romano, Evelyn Walsh, a name she had finally stopped feeling like a stranger inside, stood in a hot shower and breathed and thought about what she was going to build next, and who she was going to be when she built it, and understood with a clarity that had no grief in it anymore that the answer to both questions was entirely, completely, and for the first time in 15 years, hers alone to decide. She turned off the water. She got dressed. She called Morgan back. The first time Evelyn Walsh sat across a conference table from Vincent Romano after his arrest, she did not recognize him immediately. That was the thing she had not anticipated. Not the courtroom, not the cameras outside the federal building, not the weight of the testimony she had already given in 4 days of debriefing. What she had not anticipated was sitting in a wood-paneled room on the 22nd floor of the federal courthouse 6 weeks after the indictment, with Morgan on her left and Gerald Foss on Vincent's right, and 2 other attorneys arranged like furniture on either side of the table, and looking at the man she had been married to for 15 years and needing a full 3 seconds before her mind assembled him correctly. He had lost weight. Not dramatically, not the kind of weight loss that reads as illness, but the particular trimming that happens when a man accustomed to controlling every variable in his environment suddenly controls none of them, and his body responds by shedding whatever it had been carrying that wasn't essential. His suit was the same quality as always. Gerald Foss would have made sure of that, the appearance of dignity being its own kind of argument, but it sat differently on him now, slightly loose at the shoulders. He looked at her when she came in. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. The meeting was a settlement conference, technically. In practice, it was the first time the 2 sides had been in the same room since the cooperation agreement, and everyone present understood that the document questions, the asset questions, the formal legal machinery, all of it was secondary to whatever passed between these 2 people in the next several hours. Foss opened with the Romano family's position on the legitimate business assets, which was that Evelyn's claim to a substantial share was complicated by the federal asset freeze currently in effect on holdings connected to the criminal investigation. Morgan responded that the legitimate businesses, the restaurant group, the real estate holdings, the logistics company, had been built with documented participation by Evelyn Walsh Romano over a 15-year period, and that the federal freeze did not extinguish marital property rights, only delayed their resolution. Vincent said nothing for the first 40 minutes. Then Foss was in the middle of a sentence about the valuation methodology for the logistics company, and Vincent said quietly, "Gerald." Foss stopped. Vincent looked at Evelyn. "Can we have 10 minutes?" Morgan looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Vincent. 5, she said. The attorneys filed out with the particular careful efficiency of professionals accustomed to being dismissed at critical moments. The door closed. The room was very quiet, the kind of quiet that exists 22 floors above street level in a sealed building, where the city is present only as a faint atmospheric fact rather than a sound. Vincent put both hands flat on the table. They were steady. She had always noticed his hands, the particular steadiness of them, the way they communicated control even when everything else in a room was uncertain. They were still steady now. Some things, she thought, don't change even when everything else does. "I want to say something," he said. "Not for the record. Not as part of this." He gestured at the empty chairs. "Just to you." She waited. "I knew what I was doing," he said. "With Charlotte. With the accounts. With the documents I put in front of you." He held her gaze. "I knew exactly what I was doing, and I told myself it was protection. that keeping you at a distance from the real operations protected you. That was a lie I chose to believe because it was convenient. He paused. I used you. I used your name and your trust and your signature, and I built something on top of all of it that you had no knowledge of and no say in. And then when it started to come apart, I let my attorneys build a case that made you the unstable one, the dangerous one. His voice did not waver. He was not performing contrition. He was stating facts with the directness of a man who has spent 6 weeks in federal custody with very little left to maintain. I want you to know that I know that. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Why? She said. Because you deserve to hear it said plainly, he said, without an attorney present. She thought about what to say and found, to her own mild surprise, that there was nothing she needed from this. Not the apology, not the acknowledgement. She had built the past 6 weeks without requiring either, and they didn't change the architecture of what she'd constructed in their absence. But she also found that she was not angry, sitting here, not in the hot flooding way she might have expected. What she felt was something more like the specific tiredness that comes after a very long effort that is finally, genuinely, almost over. I know you know it, she said. You've always known what you were doing. That was never the question. He looked at her. The question, she said, was whether I did. And for a long time I didn't. And then I did. She straightened in her chair. So we're going to go back to what we were doing, and Gerald is going to recommend that you accept the settlement terms as Morgan's team has outlined them, and you're going to do that because it is the rational thing to do, and because fighting it will cost you time and money you don't have and will not change the outcome. She paused. And then we'll be done. He studied her face for a moment with the assessing look she had known for 15 years. The one that read rooms and calculated odds and determined the most efficient path through any situation. And then something in it shifted. Not collapsed, not broke, but shifted. The way a very controlled person's expression shifts when they encounter something they weren't calculating for. You're different, he said. Yes, she said. She stood and went to the door and opened it, and the attorneys came back in with their folders and their measured expressions, and 2 hours later the settlement framework was agreed upon. Evelyn would receive 40% of the verified legitimate Romano business assets, with the specific holdings to be determined as the federal asset. Freeze was lifted on a rolling basis. The Astor Street house would be sold, the proceeds split. The estate where Charlotte and Lily lived would be retained in trust for Lily's benefit, the arrangement Evelyn had insisted upon, and which Vincent had accepted without argument. When it was over, Evelyn walked out of the building alone. She stood on the sidewalk in the March air. It was warmer now, genuinely warmer, the kind of March day Chicago occasionally produces as a surprise. The sky clear and the light direct, and the lake visible at the end of the cross streets in flashes of blue-gray. And she stood there for a moment, just breathing. Her phone buzzed. Morgan. Good work in there. The Astor Street listing goes up Friday. She put the phone in her coat pocket and walked. The grand jury proceedings lasted 6 weeks. Evelyn testified twice. Once in the formal deposition setting she had already practiced in the debriefings. Once in a session where the questions came faster and from multiple directions as the jury worked through the financial structure of the Romano laundering network. She answered everything she was asked. She did not elaborate beyond what was asked. She did not editorialize. She did not perform a motion for the room or suppress it in a way that read as suspicious. She simply told the truth in the flat, precise, heavily documented way that Rachel Morgan had prepared her to tell it, and let the documents do the work that documents are designed to do. Marco DeLucci testified for 11 days. 2 other capos testified for a combined 9. A mid-level financial manager named Torres, who had been the operational link between Vincent's legitimate businesses and the offshore account network, testified for 14 days and provided the kind of granular transactional detail that made the jury's job largely mechanical, connecting numbers to names, to dates, to transfers in a way that left very little space for reasonable doubt. Charlotte Hayes's corrected statement was entered into the record during the 3rd week. Her attorney had worked with Harker's office to structure it as voluntary and proactive. The original false statement was not prosecuted. Harker had agreed to that as part of the corrected submission. But it remained in the case file, a documented fact of what had been asked of Charlotte and what she had initially provided. Evelyn did not attend the session where Charlotte's statement was discussed. She found she had no need to. On a Thursday in April, she drove to the estate for the third and last time. Charlotte met her at the gate again. She looked better than she had in February. Not rested exactly. The first months with an infant don't allow for rest, but more settled. More herself, in whatever way herself was still being defined. Lily was in a carrier on her chest, awake and looking at the world with the concentrated attention of an infant encountering it fresh. They walked in the garden rather than going inside. The grounds were showing the first real green of the season, the grass coming back, the trees beginning to fill. It was a beautiful property. Evelyn had thought so even the first time she'd seen it from the tree line in February cold. "The estate is going into trust," Evelyn said, "for Lily. The terms are that you can remain here until Lily is 18, at which point the property decision is hers. The trust covers maintenance and property taxes." She paused. Vincent agreed to the terms. They're in the settlement. Charlotte walked with her eyes on the ground for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," Evelyn agreed. "Why did you?" Evelyn looked at Lily, at the dark hair and the small, concentrated face, the slight fist curled against Charlotte's collarbone. "Because she didn't choose any of this," she said. "And the decisions that built this house around her were made by adults who should have known better, including her father and including you." She paused. "She deserves something that isn't built on a lie. The house isn't the lie. The house is just a house." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "I gave the corrected statement," she said. "Not because you asked me to." "I know. I gave it because I looked at her." She touched Lily's head, a light, automatic motion. "And I thought about what I'd been willing to do and call it protection, and I didn't want her to grow up and find out that I'd done that I'd called it protection when it was really just fear." She looked at Evelyn. "I think you know something about that." Evelyn looked at the garden. The light was coming through the trees at a low angle, the afternoon beginning to think about evening. "I know something about signing things without reading them carefully enough," she said. "That's different from what you did. But yes, I know something about fear wearing other people's clothing." They walked the rest of the garden in silence, which was not uncomfortable. Before Evelyn left, Charlotte said her name. Walsh, she used Walsh, which Evelyn registered, and when she turned, Charlotte was looking at her with a directness that had cost her something to arrive at. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said, "for the statement. For all of it." Evelyn looked at her for a moment. "Take care of her," she said. She meant Lily. Charlotte knew she meant Lily. She drove away from the estate for the last time and did not look back at it in the rearview mirror. Don Vincent Romano entered his guilty plea on a Wednesday morning in May. Evelyn did not attend. She was in a meeting at Julian Blackwell's investment firm on Michigan Avenue, going over the structure of a real estate analysis project that the firm had taken on and that she had been brought in to assess. Her first formal project in her new role, which had no title yet because they hadn't gotten around to formalizing one, and which she found she preferred that way. For now. She learned about the plea from Morgan's text, which arrived at 10:47 a.m., while she was in the middle of a sentence about projected returns on a mixed-use development in the South Loop. She read the text, set her phone face down on the conference table, and finished her sentence. Julian, across the table, saw her set the phone down. He said nothing. He had developed, she had noticed over the past months of working together, a very precise instinct for when to speak and when to be still. It was the quality she had registered first as control, and had since come to understand as something more considered than that, a genuine attention to what the person across from him actually needed, as opposed to what he might want to offer. She finished the meeting. She walked with Julian to the elevator afterward, and in the corridor he said, "Do you want to get out of here for a while?" She thought about it. "Yes," she said. They walked along the lakefront for an hour, which was not planned and which required no discussion. The lake in May was the particular blue-gray that meant the water temperature had not yet caught up with the air temperature, the light bright, and the wind cool off the water. They walked in the easy quiet of two people who had accumulated enough shared history, strange and specific as it was, to not require constant conversation to justify their proximity. She told him about the plea, about the settlement, about the meeting with Vincent in the 22nd floor conference room and the 5 minutes without the attorneys. He apologized, she said. Did it help? Julian said. She thought about this honestly. No, she said, but it didn't need to. I'd already done everything that needed doing without it. She paused. That's the thing I didn't understand at the beginning. I kept thinking there was something I needed from him, a real accounting, a real acknowledgement. And it took a long time to understand that waiting for that was just another way of letting him determine the pace of my life. Julian was quiet for a moment. They walked. The lake moved beside them with its indifferent enormity. Victoria accepted the cooperation agreement, he said. She's going to avoid indictment. She loses the organization, or what's left of it, after the Romano network's collapse disrupted the positioning she'd built. She loses 3 years of strategy. He paused. She's not someone who accepts loss gracefully. I know, Evelyn said. She knows I gave you the deposition. I know that too. He looked at her. She's not going to come after you, he said, if that's what you're thinking. Her attorneys have made very clear that she understands what additional federal exposure would mean. He paused. She's going to rebuild, differently. Something legitimate, probably, because the organized crime infrastructure is too damaged now. But she's going to rebuild. Good, Evelyn said. Julian looked at her. Good? She's intelligent, Evelyn said. Ruthless and willing to use people as instruments, but intelligent. If she rebuilds towards something legitimate, that's better for the city than the alternative. She paused. I don't need her destroyed. I just needed to not be her instrument. They walked another half block before Julian said, You're a more generous person than most people would be in your position. I'm not generous, she said. I'm just not interested in spending energy on hating her. Hate is expensive, and I've got other things to build. He smiled at that. A real smile, not the careful social one she had seen him deploy in meetings, but the one that appeared occasionally when he encountered something that surprised him in a way he found he liked. She noticed it. She had been noticing it, she realized, for longer than she'd acknowledged. They stopped at a bench overlooking the water and sat without discussing whether to sit, which was its own kind of answer to a question neither of them had asked yet. The wind came off the lake and moved through the trees along the path. The light was doing what late afternoon light does in May in Chicago, arriving at angles that make ordinary things look like they've been considered. I want to ask you something, Julian said. She waited. The investment firm. The role, whatever we end up calling it. He looked at the lake. I want to make sure you're doing it because you want to, and not because it was the available next thing when everything else was burning. She thought about this carefully because it deserved careful thought. She thought about the 4 months since the debriefings, the daily work of building her understanding of the firm's portfolio, the specific satisfaction she had found in the real estate analysis work, not the satisfaction of being permitted to contribute, but the satisfaction of being the person in the room who understood something the other people in the room didn't, and having that understanding valued for what it was, rather than as a reflection of whose wife she happened to be. I'm doing it, she said, because I'm good at it and because it's mine. She paused. Those are the only 2 reasons I'm interested in doing anything from this point forward. He looked at her then, directly, without the careful assessment she had gotten used to reading as his default mode. And what was in his face was simpler than assessment. It was just attention, the kind of attention that is not calculating anything, not preparing any response, just present. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They sat for a while longer. The city moved behind them, going about its business. The lake did what the lake always did. The sentencing came in July. Don Vincent Romano received 12 years in federal prison on multiple counts of racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud, and organized crime conspiracy. The sentence reflected his cooperation in the later stages of the investigation, which had dismantled the remaining Romano family network, identified offshore accounts the initial investigation had not located, and provided detailed testimony against 2 international financial intermediaries whose cooperation in turn opened cases in 3 other jurisdictions. Evelyn read the sentencing report in Morgan's office on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in the same leather chair she had sat in for their first meeting, which felt like a different life and was. Morgan sat across from her with a cup of coffee and watched her read through it. When Evelyn set it down, Morgan said, "Any of it surprise you?" "The 12 years," Evelyn said. "I expected more." "The cooperation weighed heavily," Morgan said. "And Foss is good at what he does. 12 years? He'll likely serve 8 to 10. She paused. "That's still a long time." "Yes," Evelyn said. "How are you?" Morgan said, and it was the first time in their entire professional relationship that Morgan had asked this question in a way that was clearly not strategic inquiry, but something more direct. Evelyn thought about it honestly. "I'm good," she said. And then, because honesty was a practice now and not just a position. "Some days are harder than others. The grief doesn't follow a logical sequence. I'll be fine for 2 weeks and then something, a smell, a street corner, something completely unrelated, and it's back." She paused. "But it doesn't take me over the way it used to. I can feel it and keep moving." Morgan nodded. She had the look of someone who recognized this description from inside, not from observation. "The business," Evelyn said, "the legitimate holdings from the settlement, the restaurant group and the real estate, I'm going to restructure them, bring them under clean ownership, new management, nothing Romano in the name or the structure." She paused. "Carter is helping with the legal reorganization. Julian's firm is advising on the financial side." "Julian Blackwell," Morgan said, with no particular inflection. "Yes," Evelyn said, with equally no particular inflection. Morgan looked at her. A small thing happened at the corner of her mouth. "Okay," she said. "It's professional," Evelyn said. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." Morgan picked up her coffee. "I was going to say that Julian Blackwell has a clean record, a genuinely legitimate business, and by every account I've seen has made a serious and sustained effort to build something separate from what his family built." She paused. "I was going to say that's worth something." Evelyn looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it is." She left Morgan's office and walked rather than taking a cab, because the July evening was warm and the city in summer had a quality she had always loved. The lake air mixing with the heat of the streets, the particular energy of a northern city that has survived another winter and is spending its summer with the specific joy of the reprieved. She walked along Michigan Avenue and then cut toward the lake and walked the path until she found a spot along the water where the bench was empty and the view was open. She sat. She thought about a February morning in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, about a heartbeat she'd heard once, small and electrical and persistent, about the ultrasound photograph, the way she'd held it with both hands, afraid the image might dissolve. She thought about what she'd lost, and she let herself feel the full weight of it without moving away from it, the way she had learned to do, not managing it from a distance, but sitting with it directly, acknowledging its real dimensions, the real cost of what had happened, and what had been taken and what she had given before she understood the price. She sat with it for a while. Then she took out her phone and called Julian. He answered on the second ring. "Hey." "The South Loop project," she said. "The mixed-use development. I went through the zoning projections again this afternoon, and I think the residential component is undersized relative to the commercial. If we adjust the ratio before the final proposal..." Evelyn. "We add approximately 12% to the projected long-term yield, which changes the risk calculus on the initial..." "Evelyn," he said, and his voice was warm and quiet and specific to her. "It's 7 in the evening. I know what time it is. The proposal isn't due until Thursday. I know when it's due." A pause. "Are you at the lake?" She looked out at the water. The light was going now, the city beginning to do what the city did at evening. Shifting registers, the workday sounds giving way to something different, the lake going from blue-gray to something darker and quieter. "Yes," she said. "Are you okay?" She thought about Morgan's question and her own answer. "Yes," she said. "I'm working on it." She paused. "Come meet me." A brief silence. Not hesitation. Something warmer than hesitation. 20 minutes, he said. "I'll be here," she said. She ended the call and put the phone in her pocket, and sat with her hands loose in her lap and looked at the lake. The water moved the way it always did, the way it had moved for every version of her that had ever sat near it. The girl who had grown up in this city, the woman who had married into its underworld, the wife who had built an empire for a man who was building another family behind her, the witness who had dismantled that empire from the inside with 15 years of careful attention and 2 months of ferocious clarity. All of those women were her. She was not trying to leave any of them behind. The last light went off the water. Somewhere in the city, in a federal correctional facility on the west side, a man who had once been Don Vincent Romano was eating dinner at a table with other men, in a room without bourbon or leather chairs or the particular weight of unchallenged authority, and learning what it felt like to be ordinary. She did not think about this with satisfaction or with sorrow. She thought about it the way you think about weather that has passed, as a fact about what the world had been, not a claim on what it was now. She heard footsteps on the path behind her and did not turn around until Julian sat beside her on the bench, which he did without ceremony, without asking if the space was available, without any of the performative consideration that men in her past had offered as a substitute for actual presence. He sat beside her and looked at the lake. "How's the water?" he said. "Same as always," she said. They sat. The city moved behind them. The lake did what the lake always does. Indifferent, enormous, uninterested in the scale of any individual's loss or recovery, simply present in the way that large bodies of water are present, outlasting everything that happens along their edges. After a while, Julian said, "The South Loop ratio. You're right, by the way. I noticed the same thing last week." She looked at him. "You didn't say anything. I wanted to see if you'd catch it." She held his gaze for a moment. "That's going to be a problem," she said, "if we're going to work together." "Is it?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I don't need to be tested. I need to be worked with." He looked at her, and in the last light off the water, she could see that the careful assessment that was his default had been set aside entirely, and what was there instead was simpler and older than assessment. "Fair," he said. "I won't do it again." "Good," she said. She looked back at the lake. The city behind her was fully into its evening now, the shift complete, the lights coming on in the high buildings that lined the lakefront like a second skyline, reflected in the water below. She had lived in this city her entire life. She knew its rhythms the way you know the rhythms of a place you have never seriously considered leaving. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Because she had grown up in its streets and married into its underworld, and dismantled a part of its criminal architecture from the inside, and all of that was true of her, and true of it, and she was not going anywhere. She thought about what she was building, not the businesses, not the legal structure of the reorganized Romano Holdings, not the investment firm's South Loop proposal, the larger thing. The architecture of a life that belonged to her, that had her name on it in the way that mattered, not forged on authorization documents, not signed at a kitchen table under the casual authority of a man who knew exactly what he was asking for. Her name, in her handwriting, on things she had read and understood and chosen, that was what she was building. It was going to take time, she knew that. The grief would come back on random Tuesdays. The legal structure of the settlement would produce paperwork for another 2 years. There would be days when the weight of the past 15 years would sit on her in a way that made the future feel theoretical rather than real. But it was real. She was sitting in it. Julian shifted slightly beside her, his shoulder finding a more comfortable angle, and she was aware of his warmth and his steadiness, and the uncomplicated fact of his presence the way you are aware of good weather. Not dramatically, not with the specific charged quality of new feeling, but with the deeper recognition of something sustainable, something that was not performing anything for her. "Ready to go," he said, eventually. She looked at the lake one more time. The water was dark now, the city lights strung along the shore, the whole enormous, indifferent fact of it doing what it had always done. "Yes," she said. She stood. She put her hands in her coat pockets. She turned away from the water and walked back toward the city lights, and Julian walked beside her, and the path ahead of them was lit and ordinary, and entirely, completely hers.